Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi. Good morning, everyone. We are here today to attend the Studio General or public lecture to be presented by Professor Richmond Stroupe. And before we begin, I would like to inform everyone that this lecture will be in 3 stages. The first is the opening, which is happening right now. The second one is the presentation by Professor Stroupe, and the last session will be Q&A. Okay, everyone, let's begin this by reciting Basmalah. And after this, Dr. Sahril Empung, who is the first Vice Dean for Academic Affairs, will open the public lecture on behalf of the Dean. But before that, I would like everyone to rise and for a 1-minute silence to remember our 3rd President, Professor B.J. Habibie, who passed away last night. Okay? Please all stand up. And And for the Muslims, you can recite the Al-Fatiha by heart. Let's start. Thank you. Yeah, you may. And yeah, and next is the speech and opening by Dr. Sahril.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Pertama-tama mari kita panjatkan puji syukur kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa taala karena limpahan kesehatan dan rahmat yang telah diberikan sehingga pada pagi hari ini kita sempat hadir pada kuliah umum yang akan dibawakan oleh Profesor Dr. Richmond Stroupe. Ya, judulnya adalah Teaching and Learning English in Indonesia, Some Observation of Unique Challenges and Opportunities. Harapan dari saya, semoga kuliah umum ini akan memberikan manfaat ya, dan dapat memberikan gambaran bagaimana kondisi pembelajaran bahasa Inggris di negara kita ini. Namun lebih dari itu, saya juga mengharapkan kepada, I also hope from you, maybe you can show us some strengths, ya, or spirit how the Japanese learn English, ya. So we can compare the spirits of the Japanese and our own people, our own students. Okay. I would also like to appreciate or express my thanks to the committee for providing this event, yeah, and to our guests, yeah. I also would like to say thank you very much for the chance to give us valuable learning or teachings, yeah, or experience. Selain dari itu, ya, aside of that, I would also like to say thanks to all the audience, yeah, the audiences for coming, and I hope you can get, yeah, the essence of what will be delivered by our guest speakers. Yeah. So, on behalf of the Dean of MPS, yeah, here I would like to officially open this event by reciting Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alright, we will begin the public lecture, but before we start, I would like to acknowledge the attendance of, once again, Professor Richmond Stroupe from Soka University in Japan, Dr. Sahril, the first Vice Dean for Academic Affairs, Dr. Aziz, the fourth Vice Dean for Cooperation Affairs, and here in the room, there are a number of officials from the departments and study programs, including Dr. Ruang. Dr. Juana is still the former head of the English literature, Indonesian literature program. In the room, there's also candidate doctor, soon to be a doctor, PhD candidate Sumra, who is the secretary of the department.
Kan mahasiswa kayaknya.
There are postgraduate students here doing PhDs and master's degree, including some of our own lecturers from the English department, Indonesian department, and other and from other universities as well. I think most of the members of the audience are our undergraduate and postgraduate students. Alright, so thank you all for coming here. And allow me to read a brief note here on Professor Richmond Stroupe. Professor Stroupe was born and raised in North Carolina, the United States of America. He obtained his PhD in International Comparative Education from the University of Southern California in the US. And then he also has an MS degree, I think it's Master of Science, maybe, in Counseling Psychology from the Florida State University in the US. And his Bachelor of Arts is in Psychology from Wake Forest University in North Carolina. Professor Stroupe is currently the chair of the MA program in International Language Education, or TESOL, at Soka University in Tokyo, Japan. He is, at the moment, doing a research project as a visiting researcher at the University of Indonesia in Depok, Indonesia, West Java, Indonesia. Professor Stroupe has worked with English language learners in Southeast Asia since 1989. And at the moment, Professor Stroupe is the president of the Japan Association for Language Teachers, which he has held since the year 2015. So without further ado, everyone, please welcome Professor Richmond Stroupe.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you for organizing this presentation. I think I'd like to get the screen. And just as we begin, I know that many of you have hand phones. Can you hold your hand phones up for me? Hold them up, hold them up, hold them up. I know you've got you ladies. Hold up your hand phones. Hold up your hand phones, yes. And then please put them face down on your desk as far to the front edge as possible. Face down. Face down. All the way at the front of the desk.
All the way at the front.
All the way at the front of the desk. Face down at the front of the desk. There we go. Face down at the front of the desk. Now, gentlemen and ladies and the students in the back, I can't see you. But keep those handphones down unless I have to walk all the way to the back of the room. Face down.
Okay.
Your hand phone? Good. At the front. All right. Okay. So, thank you for that. Again, thank you very much for having me today. You don't need your hand phones because I'm being videotaped, and I'm also going to make my presentation available to you online. So you can just sit back and relax and listen. As I was introduced, I am originally from the United States, but I've actually lived in Asia longer than I lived in the United States. Currently, I am working on a master's program in TESOL at Soka University in Tokyo, Japan. I'd also like to let everyone know, particularly the audience at the back, that we have very generous scholarships for international students who want to pursue their master's degree in TESOL at my university. We have about 75% international students at in my program. I'm very happy that as a tourist I was able to come to Indonesia many times and enjoy your wonderful country. However, I noticed when I looked at these pictures, they're all in Java. And I'm very happy to have the opportunity to come to Eastern Indonesia. And I've enjoyed my time here, and I hope I can come back not only as a researcher, but also as a tourist. As I mentioned, I'm a visiting researcher. My home university is Soka University. It's in Tokyo, Japan. And I'm the chair of the master's program in TESOL. And we're considering possibility, I'm going to be in discussions when I go back, to develop a doctoral program as well. But I'm honored to be a visiting researcher connected to the University of Indonesia. I'm on a research sabbatical, so I've been here for 6 months. And this is close to the end. I came here April 1st, and I've got about less than 2 weeks, and then I have to go back to Japan and start my regular work again. I chose Indonesia because I had traveled here, I have friends here, but also because, as you know, Indonesia is so culturally and linguistically diverse. And I'm very interested in how English fits into this very complex landscape of language and culture and how teachers are prepared. I am, as I mentioned, I'm in charge of the Master's in TESOL program, so my job is to prepare teachers to become English teachers in the future. So I wanted to find out how that happens here in Indonesia with so many languages and so many cultures. So I'm focusing on pre-service teacher preparation, the students at the back, just like my students. Also, practicing teachers in the classroom. How many of you are secondary school teachers, junior high or high school teachers? Anyone? Junior high, high school teachers? Got one, two, couple? Okay, all right. So I'm very interested to be able to understand how you teach in your classroom and how the languages that you use and how you use those languages for different purposes. So my current methodology is that I am interviewing teachers. I'm also interviewing principals and vice principals. I'm interviewing teacher educators and also students who are becoming teachers in the future. And as you know, there are 7 different regions in Indonesia. I'm happy to say that I've been to all of those different regions to collect data, including now Sulawesi, because I've been able to come to Makassar. So I began in Kalimantan, and then went to Bali. From Bali, I can't remember the exact, but I went to Bali, Padang, Medan, Ambon, Kupang, Papua, and now Makassar. So I've spent more time at the airport in Jakarta than the University of Indonesia campus, I think. But it's been a wonderful experience, and what I've learned is that the more I learn about Indonesia, the less I know about Indonesia. Because there's so much to know. I spend as much time as I can in each location, but in reality I need to spend months or even longer to try to have a better understanding. So what I'm going to be talking about today is just a brief snapshot of some observations that I've been able to make, hopefully, around the country. So I want to talk first. One of the things that I hear often is this idea of a native speaker and this focus on native speakers. And I want to talk about what I consider a false dichotomy between native speakers and non-native speakers, teachers of English. And then I want to go through and talk about some preliminary findings from my research, and certainly some strengths that I have noticed with teachers here, but also some challenges and some observations about how to maybe overcome some of those challenges. So of course, English is a very popular language. It's a very common language. It's a very important language, economically, socially, certainly with technology. So English is still an important language, but there are also other languages, Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin, that are also important foreign languages as well. But I want to talk a little bit about me being a native speaker. So am I a native speaker? Yes? No? Yeah? Oh, okay, so what does that mean though? If I'm a native speaker, what does that mean? What does it mean? There's this whole concept of what it means to be a native speaker. Oftentimes, we're seen as experts simply because we are a native speaker of English, which I think is a huge mistake. When I first came in 1989 to Japan, I was hired because I was a native speaker. At that time, I had blonde hair, a lot of blonde hair. here is only being a native speaker does not give you the authority or the ability to teach English or to talk about language education. I showed you the map of the dialect map of the United States. This is a similar one from the UK, and it's changing. The dialects in the UK are changing. I had a colleague from the UK when I first came to Japan, and we would talk, and I could never understand anything that he said. So he had a very, very, very heavy accent. He was a native speaker, ooh, ah, right? But I could never understand anything that he said. I don't know how he taught English to our students. And the same is true in Australia. So if you look at the Australia map, it's also very different. So it's important not to make assumptions about native speaking. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the president of the Japan Association for Language Teaching. And we have advertisements for teaching positions all over Japan. But if an advertisement includes a requirement of native speaking, we reject that advertisement. We will not promote that because it's discriminatory and an invalid assessment of a teacher's abilities. Now, we do accept native-like speaking. So we do want our teachers to speak English at a high proficiency. But particularly at my university, we don't care if they are from Asia, Southeast Asia, Europe, etc. In fact, we prefer to hire teachers from non-native English-speaking countries because what's important, our students are not going to be probably speaking to people who look like me in the future. Our students will be speaking to people who look like them in Asia or in Europe. So we actually want to hire non-native English-speaking teachers to teach our students. So let's talk about this dichotomy between native speaking and non-native speaking teachers. There's often comparisons there. And if you see, both native speaking and non-native speaking, they both have different advantages and disadvantages. Right? So, as a native speaker, I do have some advantages. Obviously, I have experience speaking English. I was at a junior high school and with one of the English classes, and I often ask students, you know, do you have any questions from me? You know, they always say, where are you from? Are you married? How old are you? Right? But one student asked me, when did you start learning English? Like a long time ago. Long time ago. So hopefully my proficiency level is quite high, but I still make mistakes. I don't speak perfect English. I still make mistakes all the time. And native speakers, we break grammatical rules constantly. We break grammatical rules constantly. Pronunciation, again, my pronunciation is quite different from someone who pronounces even American English from New York or Boston, for example. I have a high vocabulary. I understand American culture, although I question American culture at some points. But I do have difficulties. I do have disadvantages as well. Sometimes I don't understand local speech. So when I first arrived in Indonesia in April, it was very difficult for me to understand some Indonesian English because the pronunciation is quite different. The vowels are spoken quite differently. Now I can understand much more, so my ear has tuned in a little bit. But at first, I couldn't understand. I had difficulty. I cannot speak Bahasa Indonesia, or Bahasa Makassar, or Bahasa Ambon, or all the other Bahasas that are across the country, right? And sometimes, if I'm just a native speaker, I don't understand grammar. I understand what sounds right, but I can't necessarily explain it, right? But at the same time, these are disadvantages. But these are disadvantages that I can overcome as a native speaker. I can learn to be more familiar with the speech. I can understand how to explain grammar clearly to my students. I don't have to be a linguistics professor. I don't have to be a linguistics professor. What I need to do is I need to know examples that my students can understand. And so that's, I think, is important. So yes, there are disadvantages to being a native speaker, but through professional development and study, I can overcome those disadvantages and become, I hope, maybe someday, a good English language teacher in Indonesia. The same is true for non-native speakers. You have advantages that I don't have. This, number one, is the most important one. When I talk to my students who are going to become English teachers in the future, when I talk to my students who are going to become English teachers in the future, I tell them, you have the ability to do something that I can never do. When you walk into the room and stand in front of your students, you are an example of a successful language learner, English language learner. I can never do that because I'm a native speaker. Imagine how powerful an image that is for a student in your classroom who comes in and looks at a teacher, and there's a teacher who speaks English, who functions in English, and who has been successful. That's one of the most powerful images you can give to your students. Right? You have to speak English to do it. But when you speak English and you function in English, you are telling some student in that classroom, you can do the same thing. You can be successful too. Never take that away from yourself. Never take that away from your students. You can do that. I can never do that. They enjoy, when I go to a school, they enjoy seeing me and saying hello to me because, you know, there's a foreigner, hi, picture, picture, picture. Right? But what's more important is that you are one of them and you have been successful and they can too. That's a very, very powerful message. You can also, you're familiar with local examinations, you're familiar with the local context. At the same time, maybe your pronunciation is not perfect. Right? Who cares? It's not important. I mean, do you need to speak a minimum level of English? Yes, of course. Right? But the teachers, some of the best teachers I have seen, make mistakes. They make mistakes. I make mistakes. They make mistakes in grammar. Their pronunciation is a little bit off. Who cares? It's not important. The bigger picture is more important, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. All right? So again, teachers make mistakes, but that's not a problem. Traditional teaching styles. Do you understand what I mean by traditional teaching style? Yeah. Okay? I see a lot of that everywhere. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that today. But again, these are advantages that can be easily overcome through professional development and study, right? So there is no focus on just native speaker. We're focusing much more now on world Englishes. And world Englishes, there's a tremendous variety. At the same time, we need to understand that there's a level of proficiency that's necessary. There's a level of proficiency that's necessary. But again, who are your students going to be speaking to in the future? Do they have to have an IELTS 6.5 or an IELTS 7 in order to communicate? No, of course not, right? Most of your students are going to be speaking to others in the region, in Southeast Asia or globally, Europe, that are also second language speakers of English, right? If you look at this picture, this is a International Youth Day, and I think there's one white guy. I don't know where he's from. All right, but you know, again, students are talking to other students from different countries, different linguistic backgrounds. Everyone is a learner of English. So what that provides us then is a continuum, of where do students need to be, where do teachers need to be on this continuum of proficiency. So of course, some of you hopefully will study abroad, get your master's degree or doctoral degrees abroad. Some of you, I hope, will come to my university and study for your master's program. And for that, we do have a minimum requirement of English on a standardized test, such as TOEFL or IELTS. But the vast majority of students, that is not their goal. They will be in meetings. They will be using English professionally. They do not need IELTS 7. They need to be able to communicate for specific purposes. And for many others, they simply need mutual intelligibility. Mutual intelligibility. All right? So mutual intelligibility means, can we communicate and understand each other? And I'll refresh your memory about my definition of communication. Communication is exchanging meaningful information. Communication is not standing at the front of the room reading a dialogue to the rest of the class. That's reading. That's not communication. Now, if you want to teach your students reading, you want to assess reading, put them at the front of the class and let them read. But let's not kid ourselves. That's not communication. Communication is the meaningful exchange of information. Let me give you a couple of examples. This is a teacher that I observed in Kalimantan. And this was one of the best teachers that I observed across the country. In fact, the top 3 teachers that I observed, one was in Kalimantan and 2 were in Kupang. All right? So those are the best teachers and they're all Indonesian. All right? This teacher was really interesting because he was engaging with all of his students. He asked them questions. He used pictures. All of the students were engaged in the class. He spoke English 95% of the time in his class. All the students understood. They responded to him in English. And he also asked questions to push students into higher order thinking skills. All right? Did he speak perfectly? No. Did he have difficulty communicating with me in the interview later? A little bit. But he was an excellent teacher. He was taking students to the next step that those students needed to go to. So it was really, really, really a good teacher. This picture is from Thailand. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the teacher I'd like to describe next. But I did meet her in Thailand. I used to live in Thailand, and I worked in Thailand when the Ministry of Education implemented English language education at the primary level. And of course, there were no primary level English teachers. So all of a sudden, the principal would come in and say, "You're a math teacher, but you speak English, so next week, you're the English teacher." So all of a sudden, the teachers didn't know how to teach English. They were terrified. They were very nervous. So we did a project around the country training trainers how to train teachers. And part of that training of the trainers was actually to go and trainers to go and work with teachers and teach them how to train. And part of that was giving feedback. So I went to a school in Samut Prakan, which is just south of Bangkok. And we went to an elementary school, and this was a typical rural elementary school. You go out, it's all dirt, no grass, because all the kids have stomped the grass to death. Wooden buildings, no glass in the windows, just shutters. Not enough desks for the students, no books for the students, just a couple books. And the teacher taught the class for about 45 minutes, 100% in English. And I think she had about 15 to 18 students. She did a really good job. Lots of TPR, open the door, total physical response. So the students were really having a good time. They were all responding in English. They were following her directions. They were doing some simple games. So for 45 minutes, they had a full English class. And I was so happy. And then after the observation, I told the teacher, I said, thank you so much for letting me come in and see your class. I really enjoyed it. And I'm thrilled because you're implementing everything that we taught you in the training. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was a joy for me to observe your class. And she smiled and looked over to the translator because she did not understand anything. And through the translator, what we realized is that she was studying English and she was only about 2 weeks ahead of her students in the textbook. And I often think of that teacher when I'm sitting in my nice, comfortable, air-conditioned office in Tokyo with my computer, and I'm like, oh, this is difficult, I don't want to teach. I think of that teacher who does so much with so little, no resources. And she doesn't worry that I can't speak English. She doesn't worry that my students can't speak English. She gets on with it, and she does what she needs to do with appropriate methodology, appropriate expectations, and she did an amazing job. So she's my idol teacher. She's the one that I always think back to. Does that look familiar? Yes. Where is that? All the Grab drivers always complain about the traffic in Makassar. Come to Jakarta. Come to Jakarta. This is real traffic in Jakarta. This is in Depok, near University of Indonesia. See, you can't understand my pronunciation. So on a Friday afternoon, that's what traffic looks like, right outside my apartment, right? But occasionally I'll get a Grab driver, and the Grab driver that I got into, we had this conversation. He said, you stay here? It's like, yes, I do. Grab driver said, oh, very traffic in the mall. And my response was, yes, very traffic everywhere in Jakarta. And we both laughed. Now, is this grammatically correct? No, of course not. Is this meaningful communication? Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's where we are on that continuum on the left-hand side. Right? That Grab driver doesn't have to pass a national exam. That Grab driver will never take an IELTS. Right? But that Grab driver has enough English that he and I can communicate for the purposes that we need to and enjoy the process. Right? So we need to be realistic about our expectations and about what students need and what students are interested in. And this is what I mean by mutually intelligible. Mutually intelligible. So again, I want to move away from this native speaking, non-native speaking, false dichotomy, and I want to talk about what it means to be an effective language educator. Right? And there are a couple of areas. And I'm going to go through this quickly, but I want to give you my slides. So the first is reflection, and that's one of the things that I want to focus on in my second part of my presentation, is reflection. Thinking about what you do in your class and why you do it. Right? Not just doing it because the curriculum says so, not just doing it because it's in the textbook, not just doing it because I've always done it that way, but critically questioning yourself why you do what you do in the classroom. Secondly, of course, we need content knowledge. We need to understand the language. I understand grammar much better now than I did when I first came to Japan because I have to explain it to my students. But I also have to review new sources. Teaching is a lifelong profession, and that means lifelong learning. So we need to continually upgrade our skills and learn what's new in the field. We also need to maintain discipline. Maximize class time. I want you to remember that one because I'm going to come back to it. Maximize class time. Develop a positive atmosphere. Technical skills, technology. Talk a little bit about that in a minute. Language proficiency. Again, I mentioned that English language teachers need to speak English. Right? But we need to be able to provide input necessary for learner successful language acquisition. That means you don't have, a language teacher doesn't have this in a social context. For example, in the English language learning classroom. We're not just going to code switch so that students can understand more clearly. I'll be teaching in English and shift to Bahasa Indonesia, but there's also local languages. Right? So some teachers will shift to a local language just to try to get students to understand, and then they'll shift back. That's code switching. But translanguaging goes beyond that. So oftentimes when we talk about our students, we often say, well, they can't speak English very well. They can't understand. They can't. And oftentimes English language education or second language education is focused on a deficiency model. Students and learners cannot speak at a current level. They don't know enough vocabulary. And integrating local languages actually gives power to students, because all of our students are proficient language learners in one or more languages. They are not at a deficient model. Just with English, they may struggle. But their home language, their mother tongue, they are proficient language learners and speakers. Bahasa Indonesia, they are more proficient language learners. So in the past, I was very much focused only English in the classroom, but not anymore. I want to use that language as a tool to help students understand, right? And that's what this particular one, this is Garcia, and she is the one that has started the movement for translanguaging. So it's important not to have languages compete with each other, right? But to work in unison with each other. So this is something that's new in the field of English language teaching, and this was something that I wanted to investigate. So it goes beyond this separate border. So oftentimes I would hear teachers say, I would ask, do you use English in the classroom? Yes. Bahasa Indonesia? Yes. What about local languages? No. This is education. This is school. We do not use local languages in the classroom. And my question is, why not? You bring local culture into the classroom. That's okay. Yes, that's okay. Local language, why not? Why not use local languages? Right? So again, if you are studying a language, and you're a student and you're making a mistake, and the teacher says, no, that's not correct. No, that's not correct. But then when you are speaking in Bahasa Indonesia, maybe that's a little bit better. Oh, but no, you're making a mistake. You're making a mistake. How demotivating is that? Compared to, okay, this is what the English word is. This is what is in Bahasa Indonesia. What is it in Bahasa Makassar? Or Bahasa Ambon? Or Bugis? Right? Why not have that student share their expertise in their language? Right? Why is that a problem? Right? I don't think that's a problem. I think that's a tool. I think that's an advantage, not a disadvantage. So when I ask teachers, when do you use Bahasa Indonesia, for example, usually it's for clarification, understanding, instruction, or convenience. Convenience. And I'll come back to that one in just a moment. All right? I also ask them, what about local languages? And again, sometimes teachers use local languages for humor, they'll make a joke, things like that, or not at all. So there's a tool there that's being underutilized for your students. All right? It's a tool that you can use to build confidence, that you can build support, you can demonstrate understanding. And do you need to speak the local language? Do you need to speak the local language to use it in class? No, of course not. Why don't you become a student? Teach me. What is that? I'm teaching you English vocabulary, Bahasa Indonesian vocabulary. Why don't you tell me what it is in Bahasa Makassar? Let me become the student. You teach me what that means. What a powerful statement to a student, to elevate that student and give that student confidence. The place that I did see this was at a school in Yogyakarta. And this school was somewhat unique. It was a private school, and the majority of these students at this school were not from Java. They were from Flores and Papua and Java. So the teacher had no choice but to help the students use their local languages in class. It was very successful. The students enjoyed it. The teacher enjoyed it. But it was actually, she was forced to, rather than making a conscious decision to do so. So in this case, what I found is that the idea how much local language is used depends on where we're talking about. So if you're in Jakarta, mostly it's English. Maybe a little bit more Bahasa Indonesia. You go to a provincial capital like Makassar or Pontianak or places like that, then there is a bit more focus on Bahasa Indonesia, a bit more focus on local languages. You move out to more rural contexts, there's a much more focus on local languages because oftentimes students don't understand Bahasa Indonesia enough to use that in the classroom. Right? So there's a continuum here about where languages are used and how their languages are used. But the key here is that local languages can be seen as a tool, right? As a tool to help students have power and have voice in the classroom. So let me talk a little bit about teachers' methodology. And I'm going to go quickly because I only have about 10 minutes left. What I've been able to observe is that most teachers have a very strong foundation of methodology. You see teachers explaining clearly. You see teachers explaining grammatical structures very clearly. You see teachers using group work, for example. So there's a lot of strong methodology there, but there's need for more sophistication and being able to adapt that methodology appropriately. And that requires reflection. For example, when you're critically reflecting, and I want you to think about these points. What's the purpose of what you're doing? Secondly is what's the learner's understanding? Do learners really understand what they're doing? Or, all of you who are teachers and all of you who are students, you know that when you do a reading, you have a reading text, then you have some questions at the bottom. What's the first thing you do? You look for the vocabulary, you match the vocabulary, and then you match the structure. It's like, answer B. Understanding? Zero. Right? All you're doing is matching patterns. Okay, so that doesn't count. Right? Looks nice, looks good on paper, but that doesn't count for understanding. But you have to think about that carefully. You have to consider, are students really understanding, or are they just answering my questions? Right? Is it relevant and interesting for students? And who's talking in your class? Who's talking in your class? Okay? So those are the key points. I'm going to come back to those many times, so try to remember them. Here's an example of an activity that I saw, I can't remember, maybe Kalimantan. Yes, in Kalimantan. And this was a great teacher. She had an activity where she had strips of paper, and she had the English words and the Bahasa Indonesia words. And then on the board, she had a PowerPoint slide. Ooh, PowerPoint. I've grown to hate PowerPoint. But she had a list of the words on both columns, English and the Bahasa Indonesia. And the students came up, and they took the little strips, and they were in groups of 4 or 5, and they went back to the tables, and you can see here, all the students were interested, and they actually matched the Bahasa Indonesia and the English on the words, right? All the students were engaged, all the students were enjoying themselves, etc. Okay, so, was this a good activity? Yes? Okay. What about understanding? Did the students demonstrate understanding? Maybe. You're cautious. You know you don't want to walk into a trap. Remember, the PowerPoint slide had the words on the board. The answers were on the board. Right? And I told the teachers I could have done that. I don't speak Bahasa Indonesia, and I could have done that because the answers were on the board. So there was no understanding. Right? There was group work. The students were having a good time. They were using English. Right? They were using the English words, but there was no understanding because they were just copying the pattern that was on the board. Right? Okay? So, again, the purpose was clear, but the understanding was missing. The students were engaged. It was relevant. The teacher wasn't talking. She was facilitating the process. So she was doing a lot of really good things, but they were missing the understanding part. Compare that to, for example, same words, same competency, same indicators, but instead of having two strips, have the cards on the words on cards. And you have the English words over here and the Bahasa Indonesia words over here. And then all the cards are face down. All right? And I'm working with my partner, and I choose a card, and I choose the English card and the Bahasa Indonesia card, and I have to see, does it match or not? Is it the same word? Is the meaning the same or not? So understanding is there. All right? And if I say yes, my partner checks, and then I can keep those cards. But if not, I have to put the cards face down again, and my partner needs to, okay, next time I pull the English word, the Bahasa Indonesia is right here. So I have to remember where that is. So next time I pick up that card, then I know where that card, then I can, and you keep doing that until all the cards are gone. All right? So the same type of activity, the same materials, same competencies, same indicators, but now students have to demonstrate understanding. So now we've taken a not very good activity, and it's an excellent activity, right, by making that simple change. Okay? Let's keep going. Are your students shy to speak English? Yes. I'm going to ask you that question again in about 10 or 15 minutes, and I hope you're going to say no. Shy is a personality characteristic. Right? I do not believe that Indonesian students are all shy. I walk onto a campus, a junior high school campus, they are hanging out the doors. Oh, bule, 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 hello, hello. Sorry, that student is not shy. I take a picture after class. They nearly knocked me down. 26 students running up. Those students are not shy. So think of the word. If you take away shy, what word can you use? Reluctant. There we go. That's a good one. Reluctant. What else? Think about that as we continue on. Technology. Technology is important, and I know that you're required to use technology in the classroom, but it does not solve educational problems. Technology does not equal 21st century skills. Right? What's worse, technology makes bad teaching worse. It is horrible. Technology makes bad teaching worse. It makes good teaching better, but technology makes bad teaching worse. Let me give you an example. These are some students that were doing their practicum. And this is from the textbook. All right? This is from a textbook. This is about an email you're introducing your students. And then it's quite a long email. This is 7th grade, junior high school, maybe 8th grade. So it's quite, and then you have the email, and then you compare it to a written letter, like a typed up written letter, all right? But some of the information here, I'm into animals. Who is ever going to use, I don't use that terminology, right? How long is it going to take you as a teacher to explain that to students? You're probably going to have to shift to Bahasa Indonesia, right? But it's useless vocabulary that's not necessary. All right? My favorite subjects at school are art and geography. Okay, that's good. But look at this. I think I'd like to become a park ranger when I graduate, perhaps work for the National Park Service? Who understands that sentence? How long is it going to take you to explain that to your students? 7th grade students in suburban or rural areas in Yogyakarta, National Park Service. That's insane. It's crazy. Right? And again, this teacher was great. She had a great group of students, a very good group of students. She was a great teacher. She had a wonderful rapport with her students. Right? But then came the PowerPoint. So what's the meaning of email? Seventh graders, right? So she's losing the back half of her students, or the back half of her class. They're not paying attention anymore. They're done. They're done. And then they compare to what's the meaning of a personal letter, right? And now we get into the structures. Now, yes, some of these are competencies, some of these are important points. But think about that. How many 7th graders are going to write an email? How many 7th graders are going to write a personal letter? How relevant is that to the students? So when you're communicating with, if you're a 7th grade, junior high school student, how do you communicate? How do you communicate? What do you use? Email? No. What do you use? Texting, WhatsApp, right? So use the same information, same idea, but put it into something that students can use. Now all of a sudden, texting, students are interested in that. That's fun. I can enjoy that, right? You can have a group where everyone introduces themselves on a WhatsApp group. Now all of a sudden, this is fun. English, not so bad. Email, boring. Letter, boring. I hate English. Right? Okay? So again, relevancy here is extremely important. So, are Indonesian students, are the students in that class shy to speak English?
No.
No. What's the word? Bored, maybe? This is not relevant to me. Why am I studying this? All right. Teacher's methodology again. What's this? It's an eye exam, right? Please keep in mind, when you are using PowerPoint, you are an English teacher, not an eye doctor. Your PowerPoint presentations should not be an eye exam for your students. There we go. So I've been picking on secondary school teachers. University professors, this is you, right here. University professors. And the shame is, this was a presentation that I went to here in Indonesia, within the last 6 months. The problem was, the topic was very interesting. The topic was really interesting. The professor was really, I wanted to understand. Put that slide up. I'm gone. Lost half the audience right there. Right? Here, this is another slide from a practicum student who was teaching at an SMK, a vocational high school. And I tell you what, this student, she had a hard class, about 16 boys, right after lunch, and they're boys, right? So they're naughty. It's right after lunch. They can't sit still. She did a great job teaching that class. She did an amazing job. She was a good teacher, but she puts this on the board. How many of those words are those students going to remember? How many words? There's 20. I don't know how many words there are up there. All right? But all of a sudden, you put that in front of students, like, oh my God, I'll never remember those. English is difficult. I'm a failure. I can't do it. I hate English. Compared to, let's take maybe just 5 of those words. 5 of those. Okay, I can understand those. That's not too bad. I remember English. Not so bad. So this is not about our students shy. This is about teaching methodology. It's about teaching methodology. Another example. Here, in this is a